I know that following in the footsteps of Christ is not always simple. In specific moments, both you and I allow our faith to waver, feeling like we succumb under the weight of our doubts and battles. Here are the words of Brother Watchman Nee. It is painful to think that what we value the most, what we hold so close to our hearts, needs to be placed before God. We feel as if we are going to lose a part of ourselves, that by letting go of what we value so much, we will be left empty, stripped of something that cannot be replaced. But what do we do when God Himself asks for what we are most reluctant to surrender? We cling to people, to dreams, to the ties we have built throughout our lives, and within us, we wage a battle. We know that God demands everything, but that everything causes pain. Watchman Nee understood well. Divided love is like a sword piercing the soul, an internal struggle that seems endless. We want to give our hearts to God, but at the same time, we feel the weight of loss. The fear of what might happen if we give up what matters most to us. We tell ourselves that we can follow God and still keep something for ourselves. We think that if we love Him a little more than others, we are already fulfilling our duty. But the Lord does not share. He does not want a part of our love, does not want to be second in our lives, not even first if there are contenders. He wants everything. And in this demand we feel the wound, the pain of renunciation. It's as if by offering what we love the most, we are losing a part of our identity, as if by letting go of those we care about the most, we are cutting the ties that define us. But Watchman Nee reminded us that only in this painful act of surrender do we find who we truly are in God. We cannot avoid the fear that grips us when God asks us for what is most precious. We want to trust. We want to believe that, by letting go of everything, He will fill that void. But what if He doesn't do that? What if, by placing our loved ones, our hopes, our dreams on the altar, nothing remains? This is the voice of fear which paralyzes us, which makes us doubt God's goodness. We struggle to understand that what He asks of us, although it tears us apart inside, is to give us something much greater. But it's not easy to see that from a place of pain. In that moment, all we feel is loss. All we see is the shadow of what we will no longer have. The fear of being alone, of by letting go of what we love being left behind. Watchman Nee taught that this is the point of greatest suffering in the believer's life. Total surrender. Not service, not obedience, but the renunciation of the heart. Because when it comes to the heart, we feel like we are giving away our essence, what makes us who we are. But this is where God calls us to trust, to believe that He will not leave us empty. He asks us to trust in His promise that whoever loses their life for His sake will find it. But how do we do that? How do we let go of those we love most without feeling like we are betraying our own heart? It's such a personal, profound battle that few dare to speak about it. But Watchman Nee faced it and showed us that this is the path of true love for God. It's not enough to love Him more than others. He demands that we love Him without reservations, without competitors. And this kind of love doesn't come from human effort, but from brokenness. It's when we have been emptied of everything, when we place every relationship, every bond, every desire on the altar, that God can fill those spaces with His love. But first, we have to go through the pain of renunciation. We think that by letting go of what we love, we will lose it forever. The human heart clings to what gives it comfort, to what makes it feel safe. We struggle to believe that, by letting go, we are actually gaining. But Watchman Nee used to say that only when we renounce everything, when our heart is completely empty of what is earthly, that God can fill it with His presence. At the moment of surrender, We only feel the emptiness, the pain, the fear of what we leave behind. But it is in that very place that true life in God begins. There at the altar where we leave everything is where we finally find what we were looking for. It is a process of death. We die to our emotions, our desires, our relationships, and this death, no matter how much we try to avoid it, is inevitable if we want to walk in the fullness of the Holy Spirit. Watchman Nee explained this with painful clarity. If we are not willing to die to what we love the most, we will never experience the power of God. We cannot hold on to our relationships, our dreams, our past, and expect the fire of God to come down. The altar must be full, and that means that everything we value the most, what hurts the most to give up, must be offered. We cling, we struggle, we try to negotiate with God, but in the end there are only two options. Either we give everything to Him, or we lose everything. And that is the pain that Watchman Nee invites us to face, the pain that leads to true freedom. Only when we let go, when we release what costs us so much, we discover that we are not losing, but gaining the life that God promised us. It is a divine parable. The more we let go, the more we receive. But only those who have gone through the fire of sacrifice truly understand this. The fire of God will not come down until there is something in our hands that we refuse to let go of. We will not see His power in our lives as long as we continue to cling to these secret loves, these ties that bind us. And as long as we do not let go, we will always live with the feeling of being incomplete, of missing out on something we never managed to achieve. But if we have the courage to surrender everything, if we face the pain of renunciation, then we will be on the right path. Difficult to hear, these words do not call us to hate, but to love God so deeply that any other affection seems pale in comparison. The Lord demands to be the first in our hearts, the absolute center of our being. And if we are not willing to give Him all our love, then, as Watchman Nee taught, we are truly giving nothing. When we look at the cross, when we contemplate the supreme sacrifice of Christ, how can we do anything other than give Him all our love? He who gave everything, who suffered pain, humiliation, and death for love of us, does He not deserve us to give Him what we value most? Without reservations, without conditions, without fear, Watchman Nee said that the believer must see his life as a continuous sacrifice, a constant consecration, because only then can we truly be free. Only by dying to ourselves do we find true life, because the love that God requires is not just an emotion, it is an act of faith, a surrender of all that we are. This type of love is not easy. It will cost everything. It will lead us to tears, to internal struggle, to the crucifixion of our deepest desires. But when we finally surrender, when we release what we have been trying to hold on to, we discover that we gain everything in Christ. Watchman Nee always emphasized that the disciple's path is a path of sacrifice, but also of deep satisfaction in God. And when we place everything in His hands, even what we value the most, He returns to us His peace, His power, and His presence. This is the gift of surrendered love. Often, we try to offer to God what is easiest for us, our time, our skills, our strengths, and even our money. We present all these things to the Lord, but still, we find ways to retain what matters most, our love. How many times do we deceive ourselves thinking that we have made enough sacrifices, that we have given what God requires? But the truth is that none of this has value if we do not first surrender our hearts, if we do not give our love completely, without reservations or conditions. God does not want just what is left over. He desires the deepest part of us, which we often try to hide or protect. And this is where the internal struggle begins, where we start to feel the weight of what it really means to consecrate ourselves to Him. Watchman Nee understood that consecration is not just an act of renouncing material things or our abilities. It is a total surrender of the heart. If we do not give our love to God completely, we are not truly giving anything, because God looks beyond our actions. He looks at our motivations, our passions, and the secret places of our being. It is easy to think that by fulfilling certain external actions, such as going to church or serving in the ministry, we have already achieved consecration. But true consecration is much more than that. It is to surrender our love to God in such a complete way that nothing else in this world can compete with Him. God demands that we love Him with all that we are. He is not willing to share the throne of our hearts with anyone, not even with the people we love the most. And that is a hard truth to accept. How can we love God more than our family, friends, or loved ones? Often we find ourselves entangled in these emotional dilemmas, feeling that giving God first place is impossible when there is so much occupying our lives and our hearts. But the Lord, in His infinite wisdom, knows that when we withhold part of our love for others or for ourselves, we are not loving Him as He demands. Watchman Nee taught us that when we finally surrender our love to God, in that total surrender, something profound happens. Something that changes our perspective, our life. Because in the act of surrendering our love, we are opening the door to an intimate and powerful relationship with Him. There are no more barriers, no more obstacles, because we are placing everything in His hands. Only then, when God is the complete owner of our love, do we experience true spiritual freedom. We are no longer subject to our desires, our emotions, or our own expectations. We let go of all that and allow God to govern our affections. Loving God is not simply an emotion or a feeling that we can switch on or off according to our circumstances. It is a decision, a daily consecration that renews itself in every moment of our lives. And sometimes this decision hurts because it implies sacrificing what we value the most. But it is precisely in this sacrifice that we find the greatest reward. Watchman Nee always said that only when we give everything, when there is nothing else to hold back, that the power of God can manifest in our lives. It's not easy to surrender our love. We cling to people, things, emotions. We believe we need to maintain a certain control, a certain balance. But God calls us to let go of all that and trust Him completely. It's a leap into the void, an act of faith that leaves us vulnerable. But it's also an act that sets us free. Because when we finally give everything to God, including our love, we realize that we never needed to hold on to anything else. He is enough. His love is enough. Watchman Nee understood this in a profound way, and his life was a living example of what it means to surrender completely to God's love. He taught us that when we do this, when we surrender everything, God fills us with a peace and a power that we cannot find anywhere else, because ultimately, when our love is completely in Him, everything else in our life falls into place. The sacrifice doesn't seem so great because we gain something much greater, the fullness of a relationship with our Creator. And in this surrender, in this moment of total surrender, we realize that we are no longer the owners of our love, but that God has transformed it, purified it, and made it part of His divine purpose. God demands that we love Him without reservations. He is not willing to share the believer's heart with anyone or anything else. Even when we believe we are giving Him first place in our lives, there are always hidden corners where we keep affections that we have not yet surrendered. God is not satisfied with being loved halfway. He knows the deepest parts of us and knows when our love is divided. It is not enough to love God more than others. We must love Him with all that we are, without holding anything back. For any reservation, any small part that we keep for ourselves or for someone else, is a barrier between us and Him. It is painful, yes. To love God with all our being is a process that leads us to confront the areas of our lives that we have not yet surrendered. He invites us to honestly look at the idols we have created in our hearts, those loves that we exalt above Him. Watchman Nee reminded us that the Lord is not satisfied with receiving more love than others, but demands to be the sole owner of our hearts. This is not a suggestion. It is a divine requirement. God does not accept rivals, for He is jealous for us. He desires us completely and will not tolerate a divided heart. Even if we deeply love others, even if we put God first in theory, if something competes with Him, our relationship with God becomes compromised. And it is in these moments of struggle, of facing ourselves and our attachments, that we feel the weight of what it really means to follow Christ. Watchman Nee described this as a deadly blow to our emotional life, that part of us that clings to what is earthly, that seeks comfort in what is temporary. It is not easy to let go of what we love in this world, but this is the call of the gospel. Christ does not call us to love Him in a comfortable or convenient way. He calls us to unconditional devotion, to a love that breaks with everything else, that leads us to leave behind all we believe sustains us to hold on to Him alone. But this kind of love, the unconditional love that God demands, does not spring from human will. It is not something we can generate by our own strength. We need God Himself to work in our hearts, to teach us to love Him as He deserves to be loved. Because our natural love, no matter how good it may seem, will always be insufficient. It will always fall short, always seek to reserve something for itself. However, when God takes control of our affections, when we allow Him to occupy every space in our heart, we experience a radical transformation. Our love ceases to be driven by emotions and turns into a sacrificial love, a love that reflects Christ's love for us. Watchman Nee warned us that if we do not completely surrender our love to God, we will end up with a divided heart. And a divided heart cannot sustain a full relationship with God. There will always be distractions, always desires and loves that compete with our devotion to the Lord. In this competition, it is our soul that suffers. Gradually, our relationship with God cools off because we allow other loves to enter and displace the one who should be at the center. Nee called this a fatal division, because anything that stands between us and God will eventually distance us from the very source of life. It is a painful process, yes, but it is necessary. God calls us to leave behind anything that hinders us from loving Him fully, because only then can we experience the freedom and power that come from an unbreakable relationship with Him. Watchman Nee taught that when we place everything we love on the altar, when we give up our deepest attachments, that is when the fire of God descends upon our lives. This fire not only consumes our sacrifice, but purifies us, frees us from the bondage of our own desires, and enables us to live fully for God. The Lord does not ask us for something that He Himself has not done. In Christ, we see the supreme example of what it means to love without reservations. He kept nothing for Himself. He gave Himself completely, with a love that led Him to the cross. And now, He calls us to do the same, to take up our cross, to die to ourselves, and to live for Him. It is not an easy calling. In fact, it is one of the most difficult callings we may face. But it is also the most glorious calling, because in this surrender, in this death to ourselves, we find true life. And so, the believer who decides to love God with all their heart, soul, and mind finds themselves on the path to a deeper and transforming relationship with the Creator. It will not be easy, but it will be the path to a freedom and fullness that cannot be found anywhere else. The altar should not be empty. Often we believe that our love for God is sufficient, simply because it is greater than the love we feel for others. We think that by giving Him a little more than we give to others, we have fulfilled His commandment. But the Lord is not satisfied with more. He wants everything. The reality is that as long as we keep a corner of our heart reserved for something else, as long as we continue to withhold something, no matter how small, we have not fully given what He demands from us. The love God seeks from us is a total love, without comparisons, without rivals, and it is in this demand that many of us stumble. We want to give our devotion to God, but at the same time we want to retain something for ourselves, for our own relationships, for our own desires. However, this kind of love does not satisfy the Lord. When we try to share our love between God and other people or things, we find ourselves trapped in an internal struggle. We feel the weight of dissatisfaction, the lack of fulfillment. God has designed us in such a way that only when we love Him above all else do we experience true peace and freedom. And this is a truth that Watchman Nee repeatedly emphasized. God does not settle for anything less than the entirety of our hearts. Even if we love Him more than others, even if we dedicate more time to serving Him than anything else, He will not be satisfied if we are still holding back something. Partial love is incomplete love, and God desires the totality of our being. This internal struggle is not new. Throughout the history of faith, men and women who followed God had to face this battle for the heart. But it is precisely in this struggle that God forges our faith. When we finally let go of what we fear losing so much, we find that we have lost nothing, but gained everything in Him. And it is there, in that act of surrender, that God meets us in a deeper and more transformative way. Watchman Nee reminded us that the Lord does not simply want us to love Him more than others. He wants us to love Him without any competition in our hearts. This kind of love frees us from the chains that the world tries to impose on us. Society tells us that we can love many things at the same time, that we can balance our love for God with our personal passions. But this is a subtle deception. God is not just another object of our affection. He does not compete with earthly loves because his place is supreme, unique, absolute. And when we try to make these loves coexist, the result is a constant conflict, a dissatisfaction that corrodes our spiritual life. We cannot have a divided heart and expect God's power to manifest fully in us. Only when we renounce all other loves that compete with him are we truly free to experience his presence in fullness. Watchman Nee taught that when God demands our love without reservations, he does so not to take something away from us, but to give us more than we can imagine. He calls us to surrender everything, because only when we do, our hands are empty enough to receive what he wants to give us. It is in this act of letting go that we discover